Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Snap No Tap podcast. And I'm indoors today because we've had torrential rain, which is much needed since like 2 o'clock in the morning. And I'm pretty upset, and I'll get into the reason why. But the first thing I got to mention is my upcoming seminar in Naperville College is actually the 21st. It's the third Sunday. So last week, I think I said it's the third Sunday, the 20th, but it's the 21st, which is still the third Sunday. They haven't changed the rotation of the days yet on our calendars, I don't think. We have to work on that. But yeah, it's the 21st at 10 a.m. North Central College, DuPage. Joe will always put the link information. And unfortunately, I was going to have one of my students who lives in Indiana come to it, but he's got to work. He was a previous guest on the show, Justin Brown, the firefighter, EMT extraordinaire, martial artist, bon vivant, and you name it, he's done it. So unfortunately, he won't be able to make it, but he will be coming to my place for a few days in September for some training. So that's good. And we are going to have a special guest, another one of these people that Joe has this, it's like animal magnetism, man. Whereas I attract predominantly like mosquitoes and sometimes flies. He attracts these awesome guys that have crazy to me things, such as the firefighter that puts out forest fires and trackers. So we have another tracker extraordinaire coming up on today's show, but let's get to, everybody's waiting to see Joe Cardinal's face. Joe, pop up on the screen.
Well, hello, everybody. Hello out there in internet land. Yeah, I know. It's always good to have a good buildup. You know, you don't want to lead with me right away because then it's all downhill. So I appreciate it. It's good broadcasting on your point there to
I watch WGN in the mornings. I learned a lot.
Very good. I was on the Bozo show on WGN back in the day. So, you know, that's probably where I peaked, honestly, right there. I didn't get to play the Bozo buckets, though, but that was still, you know, I actually did meet the original Bozo. So that's one of my claims to fame. So did you guys have Bozo? Like,
no,
I mean, professionally, a Bozo. I know you had a lot of Bozos in Cleveland, but.
Yeah, no, we were the forefront of like the nighttime television scary movie / horrible movie hosts. We had a gentleman named Ernie Anderson, but went by Goulardi. He started it all. And then it became the Ghoul in Cleveland. Out here, you have Svengoolie. They're all takeoffs from the original, which was Ernie Anderson. And he left Cleveland for riches in Hollywood. He was a very famous voice actor who probably he's passed away several years ago, but his big thing was he would do ABC television promos. And one of them was like, it's the Love Boat. He would do the introduction every week of what, you know, the coming up episodes. And they all started at a television station called WJW, local CBS. And probably its most famous alum was the legendary Tim Conway of McHale's Navy, Disney, and Carol Burnett fame, who started on that channel, followed Ernie Anderson out to Hollywood. And as they say, the rest is history. Tim Conway, one of the funniest men that ever lived. and they had another gentleman there who I actually met once, Big Chuck Shadowski, who ended up hosting the show after Gallardi left. It was the Houlihan and Big Chuck show, and then became Big Chuck and Little John. They wanted him out in Hollywood, and he was just a homespun Cleveland guy that said, nope, not leaving, staying in Cleveland. And he spent his whole career in Cleveland. I think he's still alive, but he would be way up there in age. But yeah, so Cleveland had a lot of that stuff. Cleveland had the very first, what you would call like talk show. Okay, that all started in Cleveland as well. And yeah, Cleveland there's a lot of firsts in Cleveland, and also a lot of firsts in Chicago.
For sure, for sure. And like I said, you may have had the first talk show, but Chicago gets Oprah, so I think we win.
You know, one of my exes, her best friend, worked for Oprah for many years.
Oh, really? That's kind of cool. Yeah, I used to drive by the Harpo Studios all the time downtown. So
That's where she worked.
Wow.
Hi, Roseanne, in case you're watching.
Well, let's get to our guest. I'm really excited to have Matt on, Matt Corondino. I met him originally last summer. I think when I went with Dwayne, I retook my standard tracker class. I came back with Dwayne, who unfortunately couldn't make this podcast this morning because I know he's a big fan of Matt and Carmen's. But Matt was one of the head instructors there, and just a fantastic instructor, great background. And he is the owner, and he and his wife are the owner instructor of Caribbean Earth Skills.
Say it again.
Caribbean Earth Skills.
Okay.
So that's down in St. Croix, which is kind of an interesting take on things. So like, I'm familiar with the tracker school and things in North America, but they're doing things down in the Caribbean, in the tropical area, which I'm sure is a completely different take. But anyways, welcome, Matt. Thanks for joining the show.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here. I got to be honest. I've never heard of Ernie Anderson, but I did watch Bozo the Clown as a kid from time to time. So I guess Joe wins on that one right there. So what can you do?
Now,
it's nice to have. I just wanted to add that it's nice to have somebody that looks like Matt today on Sunday of all days. I feel
we can't talk about religion. That's one of the things that we never talk about on a survival trip. We got a bunch of things that we don't go there. So I won't go there.
Yeah, good.
No, I was close.
We don't go there either. Politics or religion, not really. No.
See, you just hit on another one we don't talk about. Just never talk about politics. It's kind of an important rule when you got a bunch of hungry people sitting around a fire.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, people are on edge. It's kind of cool to get to see. Is that your porch there? I see it looks like surfboards.
Yeah, this is kind of the front room of our house here, and that's some of our surfboard quiver right there. My wife and I are. That's actually part of the reason why we're in the Caribbean. We wanted to be somewhere where we could be in a forest or like a forested area, but also be close to the ocean. And because the west coast of the United States, the water's so much colder, we didn't want to have wetsuits for surfing all the time. So yeah, this is definitely one of our big passions is surfing and being in the water. And that was a big attraction for us to move down here. I mean, other than all the great things about living in the Caribbean.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. Now, do you guys also teach surfing as part of your teaching?
Now, we kind of refrain from teaching the surfing just because it's kind of hard to, I'm not good at teaching it. I get too focused on the waves. It's one of those things that just, it takes over my whole brain and my whole life. We can't talk about surfing because I won't stop talking about it. And that's why I don't usually teach it because, yeah, I get too caught up in wanting to do it to actually teach it very well. But we definitely have extra boards actually the first students that ever came down to learn primitive skills were both surfers. And that was actually a reason why they wanted to come, because they knew we were surfers and they knew that if there was going to be waves that they'd be able to go and surf and they could drop whatever else they were doing and go and surf, which is what surfers do. It's an addiction. You'll ruin your whole life for the sake of surfing if the waves are good. And it's true. You totally will give up everything else for the surf. My wife is making a smirk right now as she deals with the chores because she knows that I will ruin my life for surfing. And this is my daughter.
Hello.
Hello.
It's my daughter Eiley.
Hi, Eiley.
So yeah, you were saying we live in the Caribbean. We live on the island of St. Croix, which is in and there's my son. There you go. Up, not covering his ears, pretending
Hey,
like
hey.
he can't hear me.
Hi, son.
Yeah, we live in St. Croix, which is in the U.S. Virgin Islands, which is about 1,000 miles east and south of Florida.
Wow, I
And,
didn't realize it was that far.
Yeah. It's neither did I the first time I came. I actually, the first time I came here was on vacation. I had a plane ticket that I needed to use, and I've been a reggae fan for a long time, and I saw that there was one of my favorite bands was having a concert, and I was like, well, I'll go there first and then bounce around the Caribbean and around the Virgin Islands. And I planned on bouncing around to a bunch of different islands, but St. Croix really, it really gathered my attention. I ended up spending most of the time here, made friends with the people who used to own the camp that we run, and started teaching. I actually came back the second time with my wife to teach a summer camp, which got canceled the day before that we showed up. And the previous owners of the camp that we own now offered us, well, they asked us if we wanted to do a survival class, because they knew that we were survival teachers in the States at the time. And we said, yeah, that would be fun. And then they let us stay for free. So we felt obligated to run the class every year. So because we were obligated to do it, we did this class every year. And that's how we ended up deciding that St. Croix would be a good place for us to move to. The owners of the camp previously decided to sell, and they were willing to hold the mortgage for us. And so we jumped on it as a cool opportunity for us to be able to move somewhere really beautiful that we didn't ever think we'd have the opportunity to move to. And that's how we ended up here in St. Croix.
Now, let me add, because I'm going to actually, unfortunately, have to bug out early today. So there are some questions that I know Joe will cover all the tracking questions once I'm off air and I can watch this podcast later. But I know that, well, I don't know much about the Caribbean. I've never been out that way, or the Caribbean. I know that there's an argument between the proper pronunciation, but all right. But the weather, we hear every year, sometimes it's just tragic, like monsoons or, hurricanes or this or that. I'd like to have you encountered like severe weather like that?
Well, 2017, there were two storms. Hurricane Irma passed about, the edge of, because hurricanes are relatively small storms, and the hurricane force winds, which is 90 miles per hour or greater, 70 miles per hour or greater, is the hurricane force winds were about 5 miles north of us. But in St. Thomas, which is about 40 miles away, it was category 5. So that's like, that storm was about 230 mile per hour sustained winds.
Wow.
And so I was here for that and got the camp all prepared for the storm, and got all of our stuff kind of put away. And then my brother's wedding was the week after that. And I decided to put some things back together, went to my brother's wedding, and then there was another storm that that popped up on the radar. And when it first popped up, it was only forecast to be a category 1. So I was like, no big deal. And I didn't change my flight right then. And like 2 days before the storm got here, it jumped to a category 3, and then it jumped to a category 5. And that was Hurricane Maria. And I know you hear a lot about how it damaged Puerto Rico, and a lot of the damage in Puerto Rico, there was definitely a lot of wind damage, but most of it was actually flooding. Because it's a much larger island, it can catch more rain, so the rivers swole up, and a lot of flooding was the main damage that they had there. Whereas here it was the wind. We had 243 mile per hour sustained winds here.
Wow.
and gusts in the 270 mile per hour range. And we got really lucky. Our house, there was like an eddy of wind around our house, because even our gutters, I'm looking at my gutters right now, they're actually still intact. So somehow our house was spared and the camp was relatively spared, but it smashed the west end of the island. It was like, we don't lose the leaves unless on the trees, unless it's very, very dry. And there was not a leaf left on any tree. And There was a tree that was in all the trees in our, not all the trees, but many of the trees in our yard were down. And there was actually a good sized tree, you know, like maybe 6-8 inches across, that I don't even know where it came from. It just landed in the yard, and I had to, you know, cut it up and clean it up. And that was about 6 weeks of chainsaw and tractor. So just cutting with the chainsaw all day, making these big piles, and then pushing things to the margin. And that was 6 weeks of doing that all day, every day. And then it took me about 3 years to build back all the buildings that got damaged. I still have one more building to rebuild, but it's not an income producer. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing when you move to the Caribbean. You know, other places you can get insurance, but here you really can't get storm insurance. If you can get this insurance, you basically don't need it. It's that expensive. And it's interesting to move somewhere where you know for a fact that there's going to be a catastrophic storm within the next 15 to 20 years. It's just a guarantee. I mean, climatologically, it's the average is once every 25 or 27 years for a major hurricane. And it was 28 years between the two last storms.
This is how I guess.
Thank you for interrupting. I see, buddy. Sorry, it's part of raising children.
They have something that has something that is so that
Your mom's
that
talking
is
to you.
like this.
I see.
Push it onto the chocolate, really hold it and it
I
makes
got it.
dance.
I got it. Show your mom. Sorry about that.
No, that's cool.
So yeah, it's definitely a way of life here, and it's a big part of when I do the building. I try to. I have a mill, and so I try to use as much local windfall and trees as I possibly can, and that helps keep the cost down. And also, you can kind of go two ways. You can build something with concrete and make it so that it's somewhat bomb-proof, or you can go the way that I've gone, which is make it so that it's. I can take the roofs off of our cabin. It's like a sailcloth roof, so I can just take it off, and then the wind blows right through it, and then the roof doesn't get blown off, and then I can repair it pretty easily. So yeah, I go the cheap route rather than the concrete route, because I guess because I'm cheap. No, it's because I'm into rebuilding things. That's what it is. I like building stuff.
Well, are there, and excuse me for my ignorance, because I don't know much about that, or really I know nothing of that area. Are there like high-rise, so to speak, condos or apartments or something in?
No,
like,
we don't have any high rises at all on the island. I know that there was a push to allow that with the zoning law, with the building codes, to change the building codes to allow certain high rises to be built if they were built in a certain manner, but they decided not to do that. So, I mean, there's buildings that are maybe up to 3 or 4 floors, but nothing taller than that. I'm sure that if somebody had enough money to build one, that might happen, but it's not something that you see commonly. It's not something you see at all here. So of the 3 U.S. Virgin Islands, St. Croix gets the least amount of tourism. The St. John and St. Thomas get the lion's share of the tourism. Part of the reason is because they're in the chain of islands where the next island is 5 miles over. And that's really popular. People can come to those islands and jump on a ferry and be at the next island in 15 minutes. And we're further south. So that affects our tourism, which is actually part of the reason why we came here. But really the only island, I mean, Puerto Rico and the other larger islands, there will be high rises because the amount of people who live there, they just need it for space. But no, there's no big high rises here. And, we don't have any branded resorts here. There's no Sandals Resort or any of the, big name resorts that you see, which again was another reason why this island was attractive to us. So it's not that there's not development here. It's just that this is a little bit more of a rural kind of feeling. There's definitely some farms here. Not a lot of islands like St. Thomas is too populated and too steep to really have hardly any food grown on the island, whereas food is grown here, and that's really common in a lot of islands. Even though you could grow a lot of food, there's not a lot of food grown in these islands. But yeah, it's a little bit more agricultural here, and a little bit more, I don't know what else to call it besides rural, because we're really dependent on tourist dollars. There's also well, it's closed now, but there was a huge refinery that was built here. When they developed the Virgin Islands, they figured that St. John was national park, and that was the development plan for that, was to keep it natural, wild. St. Thomas was kind of more the commerce people, it's people historically had come there because it has a great harbor. And then St. Croix, they made it an industrial island, but there's no oil to be found here. So that's not a long-term plan. So there's definitely development, but not high rises, and not any, no branded resorts or anything like that. And we got just enough wild lands for me to stay sane.
Do you have restaurants and movie theaters?
Definitely. It's actually pretty quaint, especially our end of the island. We're not loaded with restaurants on this end, but in Christiansted, there's a boardwalk where there's a number of different restaurants and bars and whatnot. And then, we're on the rough side of the island, they say. I like it better, to be honest with you. It's definitely more local, more West Indian local, as opposed to people like myself who've moved here from afar. And it's part of what I appreciate about living here, is living close to the local population. And we stay here, other than when I go up to New Jersey to teach, where I met Joe. We're here year round. We're pretty committed to living here and to being here as much as we can.
So then you would be considered what, an expat, they call that?
Yeah, well, typically people would call me a statesider here. I guess people don't use the term expat because it's a U.S. territory.
Oh, yeah.
It's funny because you mentioned not talking about politics, but it's really interesting living in a territory, because if I lived in a foreign country, I could vote for president. But because I live in a U.S. territory, I can't vote for president.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. Yeah, that's, I
Well,
there's-
there goes your hope for running, Joe. You were hoping for one vote.
I was his first vote.
Yeah, see, you blew it. Well, how far are you from now? Oh, no, forget it. I would think American Samoa is on the other side. That's in the Pacific.
Exactly.
right? Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
So
Yeah, it's boundary.
so we're about 90 miles from Puerto Rico, which is the next territory that's close by. And then there's a very little known, there's an island off the coast of Haiti that the United States also owns, called Navassa Island, which it was actually purchased because there's tons of bird guano there. And this was in the 1800s. It was purchased. It was won by force in the War of 1812 for the sake of all that guano, to use the guano to make gunpowder. And now it's a territory, but nobody lives there. They never let anybody develop there because they wanted the bird poop for gunpowder. But yeah, so those are the only territories in this region of the world, is Navassa Island, which nobody knows about, Puerto Rico, and then the U.S. Virgin Islands. And then all the other territories, U.S. territories, are in the Pacific.
So how far from, let's say, Bermuda? That would be closer to the mainland of America.
Yeah, we're much further out. If you think about the Caribbean as like Florida's here, and the Caribbean's like this square. Right, the base of Florida is here, and so Caribbean's a square. We're all the way out here at the corner, whereas Puerto Rico's here, and then the Bahamas are up here above that kind of square that the Virgin Islands makes. We're actually closer to South America. We're about 300 or 400 miles closer to Venezuela than we are to the United States.
Interesting. See, I've known a lot of Puerto Rican people. I've dated, my high school sweetheart, she was Puerto Rican, but I've known a lot of people from Puerto Rico. Cleveland had that's where I'm originally from. Cleveland had a large Puerto Rican population, and there's quite a few in Chicago that Chicago has a Humboldt Park area in particular, a lot of Puerto Ricans there. So I'm familiar with them, and I'm familiar with somewhat their culture and their food, which I love.
We have a lot of Puerto Ricans here as well. Call them Crucian Ricans, especially a lot of people from Vieques. Vieques and Culebra are two islands that are off the coast, just a little ways off of Puerto Rico. And Vieques was vacated half of the island because the U.S. The military wanted to use it as a bombing range, and so a lot of the people who were forced off of Vieques came to St. Croix because this would have been in the 50s and 60s, and sugar was still an industry here at that time, and it was in Vieques as well. So a lot of people came from Vieques, and there's quite a few families, Crucian Rican families. So you hear Spanish spoken quite a bit. Lots of people flying the Puerto Rican flag. Yeah, I only been to Puerto Rico a couple of times, and it was for teaching primitive skills for some friends of mine that I met, the same place that I met Joe. But yeah, it's definitely also a very strong presence of Puerto Ricans here, as well as any major city in the U.S. is going to have a pretty large Puerto Rican population.
You seem to be a very knowledgeable. You're a very knowledgeable person about where you live.
I'm a nerd.
Well, no, it impresses me because, I know a lot of people who really don't, that live around here, the greater Chicagoland area that don't even go to Chicago, don't really know much about the history of that. And, I'm big on, well, my heart's always going to be with Cleveland. That's my hometown. That's always going to be my favorite, but I love Chicago. This area. So I like people like yourself who immerse themselves in the culture. And, I try to tell these folks that, that as a single guy, older guy, I meet a lot of women that all they want to do is travel. That's all they want to do. I'm like, you know what? There's probably interesting things within 30 minutes of where you live or so, an hour of where you live that you've never even investigated. Why do you need to travel all over when there's so much in your zone? And it sounds to me like you've capitalized on that. You got to know these islands and the surrounding locales, which is, I think that's great.
What's interesting too is that I never cared about learning about the local history anywhere that I lived until I started to get into primitive skills. Part of the skill set that we teach when we're teaching people how to survive with nothing is awareness. And a big part of that awareness, so you have like the in the moment awareness where, if you want to bring it to martial arts, you have the moment where you're actually getting live punches thrown at you. And you have that awareness where you're opening yourself to okay, I got to dodge right now, or I got to counter or put up a block. And then you have the awareness that might be compared to training, where you're kind of building a base of knowledge. If I keep throwing this punch or throw this kick like that, or I do this throw this time, every time, I'm building that knowledge base in martial arts. What's kind of the same with survival. You have the in the moment awareness where if I want to catch an animal, I have to be listening and be moving silently as much as possible. And then I have the foundational part where I need to know what are the types of animals that are here? What are the types of plants that are here? And so building that base of knowledge for the survival skills is actually what got me interested in learning about the human history places, the cultural history of places. When I study history, not just here, but especially here, you don't, it's all human history. There's not much natural history to read about the Caribbean because it was a place that was just exploited. Nobody cared to learn about the natives who lived here in this island in particular. So yeah, that it's you wouldn't think that learning about nature would guide you towards learning about people, but it ended up actually sparking my interest in history. It's not something that I paid attention to in school very much, but
right.
Turns out I'm actually interested in it. Who'd have thunk it?
Well, guys, unfortunately for me, who'd have thunk it, but my ride, the pickup truck ready for me to load furniture is here. They're here. So I'm going to have to bail. I thought they were coming at 11:30, but they're coming now. So you're an interesting fellow, man. I hope we keep in touch. I'm actually excited to watch this podcast later because I know Joe's so into tracking. He thinks so much of you guys, all the instructors, and also the other participants. So what they have going on in New Jersey seems to be an amazing program. And, I look forward to hopefully meeting some of you guys, and you in particular one day in person, if at all possible. Probably, it's a pipe dream. but you never know. But
Mhm.
Joe, keep up with the good show. I'm gonna X out of here, guys. I'll talk to you later. Nice to
Okay,
meet
now,
you, Matt.
Nice to meet you. as
now
well.
we can start talking about Tony. So
All right.
Okay.
Wait, I'm not out yet. Wait. Bye-bye.
Uh-oh, accounting, is that what we're going to talk about? I hope not. Maybe. I guess it's important.
well, let's start back at the beginning. So where did you grow up? What did you do? What were you interested in? Those kind of things, and how did that get into the earth skills?
So I grew up in Virginia, in Southern Virginia, in Norfolk. So not really the most nature connected place that you could think of. And what was I interested in? Nothing. As many American young people, kind of the same thing. You don't really. There's not much. There's not much variety to the things that are suggested to you as a young person in this country. So I can't say that I was interested in much of anything, except we would always camp instead of staying in hotels when we did family trips. I don't think it would have happened if we had more money, but we were poor. So every time we went on a family trip, we would camp. And it was just car camping, just park and pull out the tent and pop it up. And so, I don't know, somewhere in high school, I remember going on a camping trip. And I remember just hanging out by a fire with my friend and looking around in the woods, and there's no car sound, there's no sounds of the city. I just remember looking around and being like, wow, I really like this. I really enjoy this. And then that kind of pushed me towards I gravitated towards friends who were into backpacking. And so I started kind of getting a little bit more into really being in nature, as opposed to just setting up a tent somewhere and camping in a campground. And so I got into backpacking, and I went to college in southern Pennsylvania at a college called Shippensburg. And Shippensburg, when I was going there, it was just a typical school, although now they have a very robust backpacking and outdoor guiding program. They actually have a program for that. When I was going there was nothing like that. But now there's a hiking club, and there's actually, like I said, a program for becoming a wilderness guide, which, man, I would have loved that. I might have stayed in school. Anyhow, I got really into hiking because the Appalachian Trail was right near there. And I just kind of got more and more into it. And I ran into a friend. I was home for spring break, and my friends and I, in the wintertime, we would go camping, and we would build these enormous fires where you had to sit like 10, 15 feet away from the fire. And we were like, we're so hardcore, we're wintertime camping. And I ran into this friend who I hadn't seen in a long time. And I was telling him how much of a badass I was for camping in the wintertime. And he was like, I have this book of this guy who basically goes into the woods naked and survives. And he handed me one of Tom Brown Jr.'s books. He handed me two of them. It was the Field Guide to Wilderness Survival, and the other one is a book called Awakening Spirits. And he was like, oh, well, maybe I'll get this other book for my brother. It'll be a better one. And he wasn't actually going to leave those books. And then he took off the next day for something, and he didn't come back, and I never saw him since then. And he left Tom's books, and I read those books, and I was like, wow, this is really cool stuff. I get into that. And so then through backpacking and just spending time in nature, each time I would go out, I'd have this book, and I was like, oh, let me try this throwing stick thing, or let me try this stalking thing. And I built a little shelter and kind of just dabbled in it for about 4 years, just dabbling here and there. And I read more and more of Tom's books. And I was living in California at the time. A girlfriend of mine was going to school there. I was living in the Redwoods, and I remember she was like, when are you going to take a class? And I was like, oh, I don't know, maybe next year sometime. And she was like, well, when I graduate next year, I'm taking a class. And then I was like, well, I'm going to go this year then. So just to beat her to the punch, I came to New Jersey, and I think it was about the second or third day of the class. It was like, okay, this is it for the rest of my life. And I knew without a doubt whatsoever that I was going to spend my life working with these primitive skills, making this my life. I had no idea that I would be teaching there. In fact, I tend to be the type of person who I let my imagination run away with me sometimes. And I remember forcing myself not to have expectations when I came to take the class. I remember had a moment where I was like, man, wouldn't it be cool if I got really into this stuff and then I started working at the school, and then I was like, okay, no, that's ridiculous. That's fantasy. And I actually, for a change for me, was able to just get rid of that expectation. Lo and behold, it turns out I got really into the things and I ended up teaching there. You know, it's funny because I remember I took a class and then I volunteered the next class. And it was towards the end of the week, and I worked my butt off the entire week. And it was the first time that I sat down to relax at all. There was a hammock set up next to the sweat lodge that was there. And it was literally the first time the entire week that I relaxed. And I laid down in this hammock, and I was kind of looking towards the house, and there was an old barn there. And Tom, who's the head honcho, was walking up to the barn to do his lecture from the house. And I was just watching him idly. And he stopped at the barn and he looked right at me, and he made eye contact at me, stared at me really hard. And I was like getting really nervous, like, oh man, I should be doing something right now. I'm being lazy. And I got up and I just started doing something. It might have been 2 or 3 years later, when I was a caretaker or an intern, I was talking with him, and he was like, I had just mentioned that, like seeing him, and he was staring at me. And I was saying it to him like, oh, you were staring at me because I was being lazy. And he was like, no, I was staring at you because I knew you were going to be around the school for a while. And, you know, it's the kind of thing that he teaches. So part of me was just thinking, oh, he's just saying that because he's trying to get me excited about being able to have that kind of awareness. But turns out he was right. So yeah, so I got pretty into it, and decided that I was going to spend my whole life teaching primitive skills, and never really thought about teaching at the tracker school. I just kind of dove into it. My parents were they were tentatively supportive. You know, you can imagine I got in trouble in high school and didn't care what anybody said about, you know, being suspended and expelled and all that. I mean, I was able to get over that and go to college and all that, but it never felt like anything I was going to do. And like most parents, they were expecting me to do a traditional, you know, get a job, earn money, and, you know, do the whole American dream. And I remember coming back from that first class, and they were like, well, what now? Because I was just carrying on about how amazing it was. And I remember it was really defeating for me. And I was just like, no, this is it. And they were like, no, really, what now? You're not going to make money doing this. And I was just like, I don't care. You know, I don't care if I don't make money doing this, which they were used to that kind of reaction. Like, okay, great, here we go again. So anyhow, they allowed me to stay in their house, and you know, I would do a job for however long I needed to earn the money to take another class, quit the job, take the class, and come home and practice until I needed to get a job again, do the same thing over again. And then got hired as an intern at the school, which doesn't actually pay you any cash. You do earn free classes. You can sell those classes, but I just did it to take more classes. And then, yeah, I guess I did that. Then I was a caretaker. And then I remember I came down to St. Croix on vacation because I had an ugly breakup. And I basically came here just to get away from life as best as I could. And I came back And I got hired like a month after coming back from St. Croix that first time. And I remember my mom was like, "They're paying you now?" I was like, "Yeah, they're paying me. Thank goodness. I can't believe it finally worked out." So they were supportive, but amazed that it actually worked out. And, even if I didn't end up teaching at the tracker school, this is what I was going to be doing with my life, which most people start a school and take 10 years, struggle through it. And then after 10 years, they either quit or their school gets enough notoriety to kind of scrape along. But I guess I was just lucky to be in the right place at the right time to get a job teaching for Tom. I'm assuming that your listeners, if they've heard some of your podcasts, have heard you talk about Tom and his whole history. But he's a New York Times best-selling author, and he's got 16 books in print. I think he's written 16 books and 14 of them are still in print. So it's a pretty good record for an author to have a book that's in print for 20 plus years. His one book has been in print. The Tracker's been in print for 44 years now. That's pretty impressive. So to be able to work for somebody like that is huge, because when I teach here, I usually get 5 to 10 students, which is really amazing. But when you have the opportunity to teach to 50 to 100 people, it makes you much better at teaching. And so I've been really fortunate to get to teach for Tom and to teach in a setting like that, because it just pushes you. You learn from everybody else's mistakes. Somebody makes a mistake that you would never have thought of, and now your knowledge is pushed further. So yeah, it's been a wild ride, just being able to work for somebody who has a reputation like Tom does.
Well, it's also kind of cool because you probably have, from like a student's perspective, he's still pretty remote to me. Like I really don't know him as a person, but like, kind of what's kind of cool over time is eventually you really get to know him. Like I know my coach Tony is kind of a friend and a person. He's no longer some kind of celebrity. He's I've kind of gone past that, where it's like, oh, he's just this guy I know who happens to be able to do these awesome things, And so it's always kind of cool, I imagine, to like a certain point when you become in that inner circle and get to hear the inside stories and get perspectives that, you can't get from just taking the classes or reading the books. So that's got to be kind of enlightening.
Well, one of the things that, so Tom has a mixed reputation. Most of his reputation is very strong because of his ability. I mean, his ability to track is pretty impressive. I've only gotten to live track, meaning that he wasn't setting out tracks for me. I've tracked with him plenty of times where he was setting out the tracks, picking them on purpose, but there's only been a couple times where I went tracking with him where it was like actually following a person at the time. And the one time he was running, he was running after this person and I could barely see the tracks at all. It was in a thick area where it was like bushes. And so you could sort of see a few places where somebody had gone through and pushed the bushes to the side. He wasn't sprinting because an old guy, but he was literally running after this person like behind them. And it was really impressive to see. So he has a reputation on the one hand that's like really positive, but he has this negative reputation. And the negative reputation is because he does not turn off that teacher. So you might get to know him, but it took probably 10 years of getting to know him to where I could, I want to say that took 10 years to get to where I could tell the difference between, oh, he's teaching now and, oh, okay, he's just hanging out. He just doesn't turn off that way of being. Every time he's trying to talk to you, he's always trying to think of some way that he can push your skills further. And it can be really maddening to people, when you just want to get an answer of, should I order the freaking hamburger meat or not? It's a pretty simple yes or no answer. It's like, I don't need to be learning about tracking right now, Tom. I just want to know if I need to buy this stupid thing. But he can't turn it off. So I would say that it's really been in the last 2 or 3 years that I've gotten to know him more personally. And honestly, it's actually amazed me more. People hold him in this, I don't want to just say they have this high regard for him. He's got this reputation as like a guru or as like a spiritual leader of some sort. And I fully understand why that is. But to know him as a person, it's like he's not that, but he is at the same time. When you spend a time around a teacher for long enough, like you're saying, you start to see those human moments. And because he doesn't let people in to his as a friend, he doesn't let people into his circle as a friend very easily. A lot of people get jaded on that because you care for somebody and you want to get to know them better. I guess I was jaded on it for a while and was thinking, well, okay, I don't want to be around him anymore because he doesn't care, or because he doesn't, you get the feeling that he doesn't care. But then over the last couple of years, I've kind of let go of that need. And I've realized now, like, oh, he's cared the entire time, but you just can't, it's hard to see that as a student. I don't see him as that spiritual guru or as that spiritual leader or as this larger than life personality. But then at the same time, when I watch him teach, it is mind-blowing. So I've kind of vacillated between, like you're saying, you don't know him that well. And a lot of people don't know him that well. And it's because we hold him in this light where he's a different type of person. And I understand why that is, because some of the things he's asking people to do, it's like, that's not possible. You just don't believe that it's possible. And then you start to see little bits of evidence like, oh, well, maybe it's not possible in this setting, but in a specific setting, it's totally possible. And I guess I've just had too many coincidences happen where I'm like, okay, it's not a coincidence anymore. So I kind of went through 2 curves of it where it was like, I don't really know this person. And I feel like I'll never get to know this person. And then I was like, okay, I don't care if I don't know this person. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, wow, maybe I do know this person pretty well. And then recently I've just been really blown away by his ability to teach. A lot of people hold him in high regard because he's a tracker he's an excellent, amazing tracker. People hold him in a high regard because of his survival skills. For me, I hold him in high regard because of his ability to teach, his ability to get students inspired and to get them to try things that they would never try before. I mean, I've seen some stuff that like really touched my heart. There was a class that we did in California, a standard class. And after the class, we were kind of milling around, and Tom was hanging out with his son, Tommy, and they were just sitting there having a conversation. And this student walked up to Tom and to Tommy, and he was like, I have something to give you, but I don't want it to seem like strange or out of the blue. So I'm going to hand it to you first, and then I'm going to explain what it's all about. And they were like, okay. And he pulled out a gun and he handed it to Tommy. And he said, this was my last gift to myself. And I was going to go home and commit suicide because my life was not worth living.
Jesus.
And he said, I don't want to do that anymore because of what you connected me to this week. And he's still around. He's still taking classes. He's still, he's still alive. And, you can't see things like that and not be affected. When I saw that, I was like, okay, I'm in the right place. I don't know. I won't say I don't know what's going on. But yeah, it's pretty intense, getting to work at a place like that. And that's not an isolated incident. That's not I'm not going to say that's happened a lot, that specific thing, because that's the only time that happened, but you see it in people's eyes a lot, especially at that first class where people come and there's a certain judgment. There's a certain, yeah, I don't know what else other word to use, but there's a certain judgment, a certain way of looking at the world. But then at the end of the week, it's like, you see this person totally open and you see the judgment kind of fall away. And you can't experience that over the course of 10 years and not see it as like a type of miracle. So I totally understand why he has the reputation that he has. And it's well-founded, you know, it's well-earned reputation.
You know, I'll just add to that, just as a student, I've been there a few times now, but even I've gotten glimpses into seeing people's lives changed. Maybe not as profound as the guy with the gun, but I remember walking into camp, just coming back from the Bobs, and there was a girl who was kneeling in front of a fire. She just made her first fire and she was weeping, and you could tell this was like a life goal, something she maybe thought she could never do. And I got to see that moment where she made that breakthrough, and there's all these little things. I mean, I think you were there. I should have gone through my notes. I think this was last year. Oh no, yeah, it was because Dwayne was there with me. But the guy who decided to sleep, and it was, he the guy who volunteered to sleep in the shelter overnight for the standard class. He was the guy. And then he had to read a poem to everybody, the next morning. He was so moved by the experience because he did something, he pushed himself, he did something that's going to be uncomfortable with, and it changed him to the point, and he just like, it was interesting. He was a different person the rest of that week. And his life is going to be different as a result of that, and yeah, that's gotta have a positive influence to say that you're working with something that, it can impact people in that way,
Well,
So-
when people come, there's a lot of people who come because they read Tom's books and they're inspired by the I hate titles such as spiritual, but a lot of people come because they read the book and they see that there's a potential for a spiritual connection. And then, or you have people who come because Tom has a good reputation and they want to learn primitive skills, want to learn how to survive with nothing. Or you have people who come and they want to learn tracking. But whatever people come for, they're connecting to something that's goes much, much deeper than just anything that Tom is doing. In our modern society, we train the part of our mind that is only connected to things that we know well. We're training the part of our mind by our modern way of teaching. We train the part of our mind that can only know things that it already knows, because we have different parts of our mind that are activated by different things, and that's what we train. We train that analytical, self-referencing part of our mind, and it becomes it's so continuous that we start to not notice that we're only training things that we already know, that we already can look up, that are A plus B equals C, that are very compartmentalized. Please stop that, Leo. Sorry, my son is making this banging noise on the door over here. So we spend our formative years training this part of ourselves that's only connected to things that we've invented, things that we've created. And then whatever reason that you go to a place like the Tracker School, and that's just one place where you can connect with that, all of a sudden you're connecting with something that's outside of yourself. It's outside of that A plus B equals C. To me, I see it as an ancient connection. We're connecting to our ancestral ancient roots. Humans have been on this world for, it depends on who you ask, but hundreds of thousands to anywhere from hundreds of thousands to millions of years. And it's only in the last 500 or 600 years that we've switched to this logical way of being. And I'm not saying that logic is bad. I mean, look at everything we've accomplished in life. It's pretty amazing to be able to talk to you right now from thousands of miles away. But we've kind of gone so far in that direction of that logical way of being, we've lost the drive to be connected to something greater. And when you go to a place that is trying to connect you to that, to those ancient roots, you start to feel this connection that you never knew you had. For me, it was all of it. The tracking made me feel connected. The survival skills made me feel connected. And what Tom calls the spiritual training, which I see as just awareness. So the awareness training, that also made me feel this sense of connection. And I think that's why it affected that person that I told that story about. It's not like it was therapy that this person could continue to come and stay at the school all the time and know that he wasn't going to need to sink back into his suicidal thoughts. He was connecting to something that he knew was going to be there all the time. You know, it's kind of hard to describe what we're talking about right now. It's much easier to live it, to experience it. And I think a lot of times when people go out into nature without any training, without any guidance at all, maybe they feel bits and pieces of that connection to nature, but it's not continuous enough for them to feel like it's real. It feels like a coincidence to people, or an isolated moment. But you know, after teaching, I hate all the terms that are connected with it: survival, tracking, awareness. I mean, they don't really capture the essence of it. But after teaching it for a number of years, you start to see the power of that feeling of connection. You start to see something deeper than just this is making a fire or this is an animal track. You start to feel that connection to something deeper. It's a really powerful thing to be a part of.
Yeah, I don't think it's funny because I mean, I do think, I mean, you can, if you try and break apart the skills or the knowledge in separate little pieces, but really it all kind of weaves together. And it, like I said, it is this thing, you know, they overlap. And so, you know, just thinking about like, you know, John Young with the bird, you know, language and all these things, there's all these different dimensions to kind of reclaiming. I'm going to like plagiarize what you guys, one of the phrases I really like from the school is like reclaiming your birthright. You know, we were born, I mean, the one gift we know we have is this earth. We were born into this world and we've been given this. And, you know, the modern world, for all its benefits and, you know, all the things that it's done and given us, it's taken a lot of people away from that. You know, when we're disconnected, or I have a friend who says we're denatured, you know? And so I think, and he's the one who gave me the Tom Brown book and back in the day, but yeah, and that's why I think there's so many different aspects of ways of connecting with it and learning about it, you know, and they overlap. That it kind of does it a disservice to say, well, I'm just learning this or I'm just learning that. You know, it is kind of basically, I mean, in maybe simple, you know, secular terms, you're becoming a naturalist again, you know, a full spectrum naturalist, you know, because there's so much to it, you know, and so there's just so many avenues to explore. And so trying to, you know, I'm looking at the ground at the tracks while I'm listening to the birds and I'm trying to feel connected, you know, there's all these different, and trying to find resources that I might build a fire with. And this is how you really become immersed in the natural environment. You know, I was thinking about when you said when people go out into nature, and I obviously a lot of my life is like, you know, go to a national park or something. You're very much a tourist. You know, you're kind of going there and looking, but you're not integrated into it. You're not living it. And so the more you can, these skills can bring you to actually not just looking at it like it was in a museum, you know, through a pane of glass, but it's like, I'm going to go into it. You know, I'm going to be immersed in it. And that's what I think is one of the goals. And it's got to be healing on a lot of levels, you know, and just, yeah, just, you know, if you're kind of not seeing hope for whether it's for yourself or for the world as it is, it's like, oh yeah, these are the things that will get us back in the right direction, you know.
I think that because of the way that we're raised, the way that we are trained from the time that we're so young, is we want a concrete answer. We want a fact that is immutable, that is never changing, that is going to stay firm and stay that way. And the reality is that doesn't exist in the lived world. Everything changes in the lived world. It might take 1,000,000 years for that mountain to wear down to dust, or it might explode its top and turn into dust in the course of a few hours. Everything changes. Every single thing in our whole world changes. And our training in the modern society is, I want something fixed. I want something that's concrete that I know is not going to change. And that doesn't exist. We create it. We believe that A plus B equals C, but sometimes something happens to B that we can't see, and all of a sudden A plus B equals Z. We can't predict that, and we can't make that firm. But our training tells us that is so. When we go out into nature, when we spend time in a space where our distractions are taken away from us, if we turn off the phone or leave it in the car, and if we get rid of all the distractions and we go out into nature and we're actually immersed in it, we start to feel like we're talking about this connection that we have to nature. And that connection, that the fact that we are from the earth, is concrete. Okay, we're connected. That is that concreteness, but it's not something that can be described. It's not something that can be explained. It's only something that can be lived and embodied. And so you can write it down in a book how you had this amazing experience, and you can describe it in the most poetic words, in the most powerful way you could possibly, record that. And somebody could read it and feel inspired and maybe touch for a moment what you have touched, but then they've got to go out and experience it. And then it gets difficult because they can't just A plus B equals C. Oh man, I went to the national park and I didn't feel that sense of connection. We got to go without expectations, first of all. You brought up John Young, one of the people that I was lucky to teach with these last couple summers. And he teaches a lot about bird language and a lot about tracking. And he teaches about the Bushmen, the Kalahari Bushmen that he spends a lot of time with. And the Kalahari Bushmen have this way of looking at the world where would they see it as what they call first creation and second creation. What they call first creation is everything in the world that's apart from what people have created. Okay, so everything, including us as human beings, everything in the world that people have not created. Now, everything that people have created, this shirt, the computer, the phone, this bow and arrowhead that I'm idly playing with, that all of the things, whether they're primitive things like this basket or whether they're modern things like this phone, that's all part of second creation, what they call second creation. And in their worldview, every problem in the world comes from second creation, comes from things that we've created. And if they have a problem, two people are arguing, and they say, okay, you're in second creation right now. We have to bring you into first creation and this problem will go away. And John asked them, well, what about lions? That's not a problem. And they said, no, lion's not a problem because we listen to the birds and the birds tell us where the lion is. And we listen to the way the baboon calls, and that tells us where the lion is. And the lion is only a problem if our minds take over and we're stuck in second creation and not listening. Then the lion will eat us. But it's second creation that made that happen. It's our it's our logical mind, our analytical mind that made that happen. And you had mentioned a birthright. That's something that Tom mentions. And it's like, what in the world is a birthright? Well, it's our birthright to be able to listen and to be connected to nature. Meaning we're all born with that ability. We're all born with that connection, but we create a separation. We create that through our training, through our belief that A plus B always equals C. It's something that we're trained to do. And I think that's why it's something that people can't explain. Like that woman, when she made the fire and she was weeping, like, why was she weeping? From a logical point of view, she made fire. She could have done that with a lighter, and it would have still kept her warm and kept her alive. But it was the fact that it came from somewhere deep within her. She made it herself. She got rid of the disconnection, the lighter that disconnected her from the fire. And there was a powerful connection there. She wouldn't be able to explain that, the same way I can't explain why it touched her so deeply. You couldn't explain that, but you could experience it, and you could be in that moment, in that time. And I think hearing John explain that there's that first creation, there's all those things that we're already connected to in the world. And then there's the things that disconnect us. And that biggest thing that disconnects us is our belief. Our belief that there has to be this type of problem, or that we have to have the lighter to start the fire, or that we have to have a tent to make it through the night, or, the sleeping bag to keep us warm. We don't have to have those things. We do have to have a skill level though. And that skill level is part of that connection. And that's why I love these skills so much. One of the things that we teach, so my wife and I teach classes when we're not in New Jersey. We teach classes here in the Virgin Islands. And if you go on our website, CaribbeanEarthSkills.com, you'll see our schedule. We actually had to put together a schedule together now. So there is a schedule. And we do classes that are like a one-day class where you might come and do basket making, or you might come and do bow making. You might come and, all of the different types of skills that we do that we could do in a day. And then we have week-long classes that are dedicated to either one specific skill or a number of skills. We have a class that is just spearfishing. We have a class that is a number of different skills: basket making, spearfishing, bow making, arrow making. It's just a mix of skills. And then it's hard to call it my favorite, but I guess what I would call our most powerful classes are survival trips. We call it a survival quest because, it's not a real survival situation. If somebody got injured, or if there was something serious that happened, we would leave. We'd call the ambulance. We'd, get the person to safety. So it's not a real survival situation. We're not actually crashing a plane in the middle of nowhere, but we call it a survival quest because we are questing towards a space of connection. So we go out, we spend the first 3 days in at the camp here in our tents, or in a cabin, if you want to spring for the cabin. And we're working on, it really depends on what people want to get out of it. So some people do make fishing hooks and line. Some people make bows and arrows. Some people make spears and throwing sticks. Some people make baskets for collection. So we make some tools, and then we do some plant studies so that people have like a baseline. And then we go to a spot on the island here that is pretty wild. The one thing that we cheat on is water. There's not a lot of water in that place that we go, but we go there so that we don't have other people, walking up to us on our shelter. Like, so we don't have to deal with the distractions of, hearing a vehicle or anything like that. So we do have water stashed, but other than that, the students are gathering everything for themselves. We bring a little bit of food. We call it the winer's portion. Everybody has a whiner inside them. And so we bring just enough food to feed that whiner inside, but all the other food is gathered by the students. The students build the shelter, they start the fires, and for me, as the I don't want to say teacher or guide, I'll say facilitator is the person who's making it happen, pushing the students gently towards self-sufficiency. What I am after for the students is for them to let go of the mental distractions, to find that space of connection. And it can be really, really powerful. I've seen it go both ways. I've seen it where people just, they get there and immediately they're like, it's only 4 days. They wouldn't say that, but it's easy to see written all over their faces. Like they're just trying to get through with the 4 days, and people still enjoy it. Those people still appreciate the time around the fire, and everybody has that moment where they're like deeply connected to nature, and they feel a powerful sense of oneness with the land around them. But really what I'm hoping for them to get is to stay in that space of connection to nature. And it's, I've had groups where it was unbelievable. We had a group and nothing actually really happened that morning. We all went out to our different areas. I was going out to this area where I had been hunting for deer. Somebody else went down to go fishing. A couple other people just went out to do gathering, and a couple people just went to sit quietly and experience whatever happened. And it poured down rain, and we all made our way back to the shelter. And we got to the shelter, and I just remember looking in everybody's eyes, not purposely. I wasn't thinking at the time I need to look in everybody's eyes, but I just remember coming back and looking at everybody's eyes, and nobody said anything for about 2 hours. We sat in the shelter while the rain poured down. The rain stopped and we started the fire again. And like, you could never explain what happened in that 2 hours. And we got back to the camp here when the whole class was over. And that's another big part of the class is the integration. When we run that class, we don't just, the class doesn't end and then people go home as soon as we get out of the woods. We come back to the camp here and we talk about everything that we learned, everything we experienced. Every single person mentioned that time in the rainstorm. Nobody could actually say why it was special. But every single person was like, the other morning when it rained and we came back together and we just sat in silence, that was the most amazing 2 hours I've experienced. One guy said it was the most amazing experience of his entire life. And it's like, we didn't even say anything. We didn't do anything. Nothing happened, but there was just a powerful, powerful connection to each other and to the earth and to that moment. And it was amazing. And that was probably one of the most powerful moments I've experienced. Now, one of the more recent classes that I've taken, or where I've, taking a class, taking people with me was we brought our homeschool kids with us, and we saw this as a rites of passage. It's a bunch of 11-year-old kids and my daughter who's 7 and my son who's 4. And there's a lot of feral goats. And that's one of the things that we focus on hunting. And these kids were like, what are we going to kill? I can't wait till we kill this. I can't wait till we kill that. And then we got out there, and this was the last full day of the class. We're sitting on the beach waiting for the sun to get lower in the sky so we don't get too sunburned while we're going to go out and collect some snails for dinner. And these goats came up on the rocks. I was like, okay, Carmen was like, okay, look over there, you guys. There's goats. So, whoa. And they look over and they see these goats. And I'm like, okay, everybody sit still, put your shoes on. Here's what we're going to do. When I say go, you're going to jump up and I told them the strategy. And I waited for the moment and I said, go. And we jumped up and we ran over, and we didn't surround the goats, but we basically stayed in between the goats and the forest. So the ocean was on one side, the goats were in between us, and then the forest is on the other side. And we knew that if they got around us, we would lose our opportunity. So the goats kind of started running, and we had fanned out so they couldn't get past us so easily. And some of them started slipping by, but there was one of the younger ones that we kind of just focused on. And we're kind of running back and forth and keeping this goat from getting around us. And it runs over to the corner. And this spot, it's a rock. It's this, we call it razor rock. It's really hard to get around on. It's very jumbled, very sharp rock. And it's right up against the ocean. And it's like the rocks come up to the ocean, and then it's like a 12-foot deep water right there. And this goat ran into the corner, and then it jumped in the water. And as soon as it hit, it just sank to the bottom. And then it popped back up, and then it was swimming, but it was just struggling to swim and just struggling. So I'm looking back and I'm like shouting instructions to everybody. And I stripped down to my underwear and just jumped in the water after the goat, swam up to the goat and grabbed it. And I brought it onto shore. And I brought it up onto shore, and the look in these kids' eyes, they were like, what do we do now? Like, oh my God, what do we do? They were in shock. They were just, they didn't know what to do. And immediately my daughter was like, I'm going to kill it. And I was like, are you sure? You sure you want to do that? And she was like, yes, I have to do it. And I was like, are you really sure? Because she loves animals. So, like, catching the turtles and raising them. She loves animals. And I was like, are you absolutely sure about this? And she's, I have to do it, Daddy. I have to do it. And so we brought this goat over and we laid it down and we're petting it and calming it down. And I'm explaining to my daughter, like, okay, you got to push really hard. So I think you're going to need help. And she's like, all right, but I'm going to hold the knife. So I said, okay. And so she held the knife in her hand and I held her hand. And I was kind of explaining to her, like, okay, we're going to calm it down. And then when I tell you, we're going to cut the throat. I'm going to push the knife in this way and we're going to pull it. We're going to cut its throat and it's going to bleed out pretty quickly. And we're calming this goat down and we're talking to it. And then I was like, okay, now. And we cut its throat and it started bleeding out. And immediately she just started bawling tears, like deeply affected. And so I was like, okay, it's sputtering blood down. It's dying on the beach there and it's bleeding out. And the kids are like still in shock. The other kids are just fully in shock. And my daughter's crying. I was just like, this is pretty intense for these kids right now. It's
I'm
like,
starting to cry.
yeah, it's really, and it was deeply intense. And I had experienced this before. So, I know how to deal with these emotions. And so I had to go back to where we were sitting and get all of our stuff because we just left it on the beach. I walked over and I go to grab the stuff on the beach and I was by myself and I turned around and I'm facing the ocean. And it was just like, wow, I just held my daughter's hand while she killed her first animal. It's like this amazing feeling of like, wow, that's unbelievable. Like my dad, he never would have been able to give me that experience just because he didn't have that skill level. And I was like, the proud dad moment, like, wow, like that was intense, unbelievable. And I go back over, I gather my stuff and I was so thankful. I was just like, wow, this is really amazing. We're going to eat really well. We got to harvest one of these goats and these kids had this powerful experience. Like, you can't even put words to it. Anyhow, I'm walked back over to where the kids were at. All the other kids were helping Carmen butcher the goat and skin it and gut it. And Eiley, my daughter, was just sitting there kind of playing with some stones by herself. And I went over to her and I was like, hey, how's it going? She was like, Daddy, that was hard. So Daddy, that was really hard. And I was like, yes, that was hard. It's hard to look into the animal's eyes and then kill it. And it's just hard to do. I was like, but something is going to die for us to live another day. It might be a plant, it might be an animal, but something's going to die for us to live another day. Do you want to live another day? And she's like, well, yeah, of course I want to live another day. I was like, okay, so you got to remember, if you're going to live another day, something's going to die. So it's better to kill it yourself and to know that it was done in a way that was thankful and appreciative. And she was like, well, what else, Daddy, is, Daddy, I was the only one who cried. She was like, yeah, she was like, I don't know why nobody else cried. And I said, well, nobody else killed the goat. Nobody else was part of that moment. She was like, yeah, but it feels weird that I cried for that when nobody else needed to cry for that. And I said, most people don't think anything of the meals that they eat. Literally just don't even think about it. Some people will sit down and say a prayer before they eat the meal, but most people don't actually think about the life of the animal that they're eating or the life of the plants that they're eating. And in that moment, I said, you were thankful and connected and empathetic. I didn't use that word with her, but she felt empathy for that animal. If you study anything about our minds, about our minds and about any animal's mind, we have a part of our brain that can be empathetic, that can feel the pain of other animals. I was doing one of these trips one time and I was apologizing to these lobsters as I threw them down on the coals. My friend was like, man, those lobsters do not care one bit. Those lobsters will spear a fish, eat it alive, and not even think twice about it. And I said, you know what? Those lobsters can't be thankful. They don't have the ability to be thankful. They don't have the ability to be empathetic. They can't feel the pain of something else. So as humans, we have that ability. When we feel empathetic, when we feel thankful, we are exercising our birthright as human beings. When we ignore that, we're ignoring our birthright. When we just eat it and put it in our bodies and it's just fuel for the machine and we let go of that, we're letting go what it means to be human. We're talking about connection a lot today and being connected to nature and what that means. Even if you don't believe in anything spiritual, anything outside of the physical, we have the ability to feel the pain of other things, not just other human beings, other animals. We can do that. When we exercise that, it makes us more human. When we ignore that, it makes us less human. And we come from a world that ignores it all the time. It's just fuel for the machine. I'm just going to eat my next meal. It doesn't matter that something died to get to me. It doesn't matter. Of course it matters. If it doesn't matter to you, you're just saying I'm not human right now. But when you decide this matters to me, I'm going to be thankful. I'm going to take the time to care about this animal. I'm still going to kill it and eat it. I'm still going to take its life, right? I'm not going to stop from living. I'm going to continue to survive, but I'm going to make the effort to care. It makes us more human. We're exercising what we have in our minds. And animals that don't do that, it's not that they choose not to. They can't do it. It's not possible for them to do it, but we can. If we can, we should. I believe if we did that more often, we wouldn't kill each other so much.
Yeah, and I think, you're right. I mean, one of our birthrights or things that makes us human, and I think actually this is something I think a concept I first learned from your wife Carmen is that each species has its role, and maybe our role here is as caretakers. We've been given an extra gift of intellect and empathy and all these things, so that we don't just survive on a reflexive moment. We're evaluating what is the best way for the environment and our tribe and other things to survive. So we're ideally in our best, we're improving things as we go. That's kind of maybe what our place is here and why we have these other dimensions to us that maybe other animals don't. And I mean, it's funny because the hunting and kind of doing the killing yourself is that's where that's definitely I know is an issue for me, and I think not in a judgmental way, just something I would struggle with, because I didn't go through those experiences as a young person. I do intellectually, like in the abstract, appreciate that, because I can empathize. I can visualize the goat there on the beach
Mm.
calming down. I've lived around animals. I've had pets. So I know these animals, there's something to them. They're not just a bag of protein, there's a personality. There's, there's something to them, a soul, if you want to call it that. And I think, yeah, at some level, we appreciate that. And when you do the killing yourself, in some ways you feel the sacrifice,
Mm.
that, if it's a cheeseburger that you didn't see what someone else is doing the hard part for you, and we are so, and again, it's another part of the denatured is, when you do the killing yourself, I imagine, at least my hope would be that you're less likely to waste that. You went, this was painful for you emotionally, and you saw the pain it was on the animal, hopefully not much, but it has a lot more value. It adds, it I guess, reminds you of the value of what, what this is. It's not just a meal that you can half finish and throw out. You're going to try and preserve this and use as much. And so I think being, again, detached from the reality of our situation, so many of us are. So I definitely appreciate that. Now it's funny, we've been talking about all these things, and I would love to spend another time just talking about how it is raising kids, because I mean, probably from day one, your kids have been raised around primitive skills and things, and just kind of how even you balance that with that kind of, and then you mentioned homeschooling, and it does in a lot of ways feel like a lot of people here in the States, they homeschool because for religious reasons or whatever, but obviously the traditional school model is not giving people the, exposure to these things. And so you having that opportunity to raise them. And, but I'd be, like I said, I don't even know if we have time today, but I would love to at some point talk just about how do you balance that between, and I don't know, maybe your goal isn't to balance that. Like, are they comfortable with the outside world, and, how did, or, and because there's this two parts, of the modern circumstance, and how do you do that, and what's it like?
We're really lucky in that, because so on top of teaching primitive skills, we also have a rental property. We have cabins that we rent out. So we get people who are coming through the camp constantly. And so my kids are exposed to a lot of different people. And that's where we're able to provide them with that balance. We try not to explain, we try not to put things in a negative context that we don't appreciate. Like we're not the type of people who, I mean, we're not opposed to going into the city and going and seeing a show or something like that, but we're not the type of people who usually do that. Go outside and tell your mom about it. Speaking of children, right there.
Yeah.
It's right there. It's right there. Sorry. Speaking of kids, yeah, we try really hard not to put things in negative terms. We definitely try to limit the television and the screen time, and to limit those things. But basically, I see it as I'm not going to spend a lot of time teaching my kids about those things. I'm comfortable allowing other people to do that. I feel like if we tried to control that urge of theirs to want to spend time watching stuff, or, to try to describe, I can't, buddy. I can't. Bring it to your mom. She's right outside. I feel like if I spent time trying to control their experience or put their experience into context, that I would do more harm than good. I'd rather let other people take care of that. But yeah, just them being around, not just, it would be one thing if we were by ourselves showing them primitive skills, but because people come to learn from us and people are passionate about learning from us, my kids see the value in that, and they see it as something that's has value outside of just mommy and daddy doing it. So we're really lucky in that regard. We don't have to explain to them why it's really cool. And the other thing is that I wasn't telling her you have to kill this goat right now. I wasn't expecting her to even want to be a part of it. Like, we had caught an iguana on that same trip, and I was saying to the kids, pin it down. And she was the first one who jumped onto it, and she's pinning it down, but she's looking the other way, like holding it down, like breathing hard and closing her eyes. And she was clearly scared of it. But I wasn't saying you need to do this now. She was telling me that she needed to do it. She felt that on her own. And I didn't have to force that on her. She was making a choice in that moment. And I think too often as not just as parents, but also as teachers, we tend to want to get across the lesson that we feel. You know, we want to make the person put it into a context that we would like them to experience it in. But I think it's really important, especially with these skills, to allow it to come about naturally. Some of the survival stuff, some of it sucks. Sometimes it's uncomfortable. Sometimes you're super hungry. Sometimes you're super tired. Sometimes you're super uncomfortable. And that's okay. Like, that's totally okay. In our modern world, we're uncomfortable quite a bit, but it's not physical discomfort. It's emotional discomfort. It's emotional pain. You know, it's when I think about that, what we're talking about connection, what are we connected to or not connected to? Or how is it that we connect with the world around us? Well, we make a choice. We make a choice to be connected. We choose to say, I'm sorry, goat, I apologize, this is gonna suck, and then cut its throat and eat it. And that's a choice that we make. So because it's a choice, it's within us, it's within our grasp, it's within our ability. When we never make that choice, when we never put ourselves in a situation to be able to make that choice, the real disconnection is with a part of ourselves. We're choosing not to acknowledge that empathy. We're choosing not to acknowledge, hey, I care. I'd rather choose, when I go to kill the goat, when I go to kill the animal before I eat it, I don't turn off that part of myself that cares. I turn that part on. I sink into that awareness because I want to feel it. I want to feel the animal's pain. I want to choose that because it's connecting me with myself. It's connecting me with the earth. If I choose not to, then I'm disconnecting from a part of myself. You know, I like to watch martial arts a lot. I like to watch mixed martial arts, and I love a good fight. I love watching a good fight where they're just going at it and they're just beating the crap out of each other. It's just entertaining to watch. But I hate it when they don't shake hands at the end. My favorite part is when you watch a really good fight and then they go to hug at the end. And you could tell it's like, oh my God, that was crazy. You were beating the crap out of me right there. Like, that totally sucked. But then afterwards, like, those two guys, they might have hated each other, but when they finally get over that BS that's in their minds, it's like they're connecting with something deeper. You know, unfortunately for them, they have to get the crap beat out of them to get to the point where they're connecting. But I love that moment where they're actually connecting. And I see a big parallel between what teaching the primitive skills, what I do with my life, and what they're doing in that moment. It's like, they know when they punch that guy that's got to hurt, because they're getting punched too. And there's no beating around the bush there. Usually, even if they hated each other or they get punched in the face 50 times, it's like afterwards they're like, okay, he was better than I thought. You know, it's like, we can only fool ourselves but so many times. And too often in our modern world, we don't put ourselves in that uncomfortable position. We allow that ego to say, I got this. It's just, I got this and it's all good and I kick ass. You know, it's important for us to be a little bit uncomfortable from time to time, because when we're uncomfortable, it's easier to fall into that empathetic mode where we're like, oh, okay, now I understand why people don't like this. Yeah, I see a lot of connection between what I teach, the primitive skills and martial arts, because you put in the training and you put in the training and you put in the training and the fight happens, and it's like you have to open a different part of your mind, and you can't just keep thinking about it in the same way you've thought about it during your training. And it's the same with primitive skills. You can work on that fire making tool as much as you want, but when it's wet out or it's snotty out and it's time to start the fire and you need that fire to eat that night, it's like all the planning goes out the window, and you just have to be listening in that moment to, okay, what does this piece of wood need? Do I need to go faster? Do I need to push harder? Do I need to go slower? It's like you can train all you want, but the experience is what makes the training valuable. You know, without that experience, it's you never know what you learned during the training part without the experience part.
Yeah, and I do think kind of related with at least some fighters, because I mean, they're both going through a struggle together and they've come through it at the end. You know, granted, in their case, they're adversarial, so they're creating the struggle for each other. But I mean, I've seen that even in the classes for a lot of people where, you know, at the end of the class, so many people have bonded together. I mean, they're making close friendships and bonds. You know, it is like the last day of school where everybody's, you know, they've been through this experience, and they've all, you know, they've seen it through together. And so it just gives you a deeper connection to the people who've been through that struggle with you. You know, even if it's the case that person is literally the struggle you're facing, if they're actually fighting you. I think there is that emotional, hey, we made it through, and because you've experienced it firsthand, you could admire what they've gone through. You know, exactly. So you have to have some respect there. You know, like, you know, it was bad for me. I know I made it bad for you, and we're made, you know, so yeah, I think that at that level, that's one of the aspects of it where, yeah, and it is unfortunate where, for whatever, sometimes because of the marketing or whatever, or things that doesn't happen between fighters, you know, or whatever, that, you know, that somehow they've poisoned things enough that they don't get to have that positive connection out of it. But so often, yeah, you're right that, you know, once the conflict is over and it's resolved, you know, or whatever, you know, then you can look at the other aspects of it, you know, and it's just
that's that type 2 fun, right? Where it's kind of sucks at the time, but then afterwards you're like, that was awesome. I'm sure that's what it has to be when you're locked in a cage with somebody and fighting, is like, it kind of sucks when you're getting punched in the face, but then when it's over, it's like, that was awesome, in that kind of way that it sucks, but it was awesome still at the same time. Yeah, it's, you know, it's, you never know what you're going to be interested in life. And then it's like, why do I like watching two people punch each other and kick each other and like smash each other and contort each other? And I guess it's just because I appreciate that what our minds are capable of. Because you know that it's not, there's part of your mind, it's like when you get punched, it's like there's part of your mind that's like, this is bad. It's like, this is bad for us. This is not good. But our minds are able to overcome that, and we're able to work through all of that. It's really amazing to see it. It's funny because I don't, she's not around. Usually I think my wife just shakes her head when I'm watching fights. It's like, why do you want to watch these two people just bloody each other like this? And I'm like, it's like primitive skills. She's like, no, it's not. It's not at all like primitive skills, but it is in that sometimes you're really cold or really hungry or really tired or really uncomfortable. And sometimes you're all of those things at the same time, but then you get the fire or you catch the animal or you finish the shelter. And it's like this amazing sense of accomplishment. And not just of accomplishment, but it really brings it back to that sense of connection. Like, whoa, It really sucked, but I learned so much about it, and I earned that fire, and that fire kept me warm. And, you know, it's not necessarily just that I'm connecting with that skill in the moment. I'm connecting with myself. And it's like you're saying, it's like we've gone through something together. It's like you've gone through an experience with this skill. I had to be uncomfortable before I could see how important it was to start the fire. You know, I had to be super cold before I could really understand what it means to be warm in this shelter. So it's all these things we're talking about is the reason why I connect so deeply with these skills, because it connects me with a part of myself that I didn't even know was there.
Well, like I said, I could keep picking your brain forever, honestly, keep going on. I feel like we just scratched the surface on stuff, but,
Yeah.
well, you know, and I'm really glad you brought up the classes, because I definitely hopefully want to promote your school a little bit. I know, you know, and get the word out there for that. So, and I definitely, like I said, I really appreciated all your teaching at the classes, and also kind of your candor. I think a lot of times, you know, in that environment, you kind of mentioned the spirituality is sometimes people, you could bring it back down to earth in a kind of a respectful way, but it's just like, oh, that's right. I'm not the only one who's maybe having these thoughts, or, you know, that, you know, these maybe, you know, able to laugh at it a little bit. I think there was one time when you just kind of made a vague grandfather joke, you know, which was like, you know, like, but it was, you know, it was a very, it was kind of a loving joke, but it was still just kind of poking fun at some of the cliches of the group there. And it was just kind of very refreshing, and kind of, you know, brought it back down to earth and said, oh, you know, I can still be myself and be a real person and still do these things, that I don't have to, you know, like I said, become some type of a guru or whatever. It's like, you can be a real person, you know, who can laugh at yourself and at these things, you know.
Mm.
And so I appreciate that. And I realized I really enjoyed you and Carmen's instruction. And so super glad to be able to have this conversation with you. Again, like I said, it's hard for me to want to stop. I could go on for a while, but I want to be respectful of your time too.
Yeah.
And I did want to,
Yeah, go ahead, please.
I was just gonna say, I do want at some point, like on my bucket list is surfing. And so I don't know somehow if I can tie that in with coming down
Well, if
for a
you
lesson.
come, I will teach you how to surf. I will do it. I'm not going to be the best instructor in the world, but I'm getting better.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. And I was just thinking, well, I immediately, so I thought about that. And then I thought immediately about how I only lasted about 10 seconds on the log. At Scout, I literally had, I think, the worst, like the shortest amount of time on that. I took one step, buckled, and fell. And it was funny. Yeah, I definitely underperformed what I thought I was going to do.
You know what was funny about that? I was talking the other night with Carmen, like, hey, we got this podcast we're going to do. And she was like, oh, who's that with? And I was like, Joe from the class. And she's like, okay, well, which one is he? And I'm describing you. And she's like, was it this guy? And I described you by the insult that I gave when you were on the log. She was like, oh, I know exactly who that guy is.
That was a good one too. You have a gift for that, because I'm like, because I did hear it right as I was falling, and I'm like, oh damn, really? Because you're like the guys at the office, and I'm like, that's what I give off, the office worker. Nice.
Hey, well, you know, you gave me that, and I ran with it. We had a conversation, and there's a lot that goes into that moment on the log. It's funny. I was talking with Tom about it, and he's like, you have a really good gift for that. I was like, what, for making fun of people? And he was like, yeah, I guess so. I was like, ah, great. But you know, when I did that, I trained for that log for months. Where I was living at the time, that time in between classes, where I was living at, there was a train tracks, and the house that we were at was right next to the train tracks. And then there was a field about a mile, a little bit more than a mile away from the house. And I walked down that train tracks. I'd walk towards the field down the train tracks with my eyes open. I'd do my running and my stalking practice in the field. And then I'd put the blindfold on and I'd walk back. I walked the entire mile plus on the train tracks. The last 3 or 4 times I did it, I walked without falling once for a mile. And I couldn't make it across that log. And there's just something about everybody's watching you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh man.
I
It-
was working on my balance too. I have like these different like exercises on one leg, and I was like, I'm gonna be as ready as I can be because I know, and well, I'll say this is that I was able to get across the log later that week when it was on a lunch break when no one was around.
Mm.
Then it was it. But the minute the crowd was there, like, and like I said,
Changed
it was completely a mind thing. I mean, like I just, yeah, I was just it was impressive how easily that affected me. Like I couldn't even.
Pissed me off so bad when I fell off that log during the class. I was so angry. I didn't really care. I was like, it doesn't matter to me if the group doesn't see me do it, all that. But I was so determined, like, I have to do this. I have to do this. And the instructors at the time, like, there was one in particular who was teaching there who he was pretty mean. Like he would make fun of you, and you could tell that he actually meant it sometimes. And he would make fun of me a lot during classes leading up to that, like even aside from that moment, which is designed, like I'm supposed to be making fun of you. That's my job in that moment, is to make fun of you because it makes it harder to cross the log. But anyway, this guy, he'd been making fun of me for like years. And I definitely gave him back some insultation too. It's not like I was totally innocent. They didn't say a word to me. Nobody said anything. Literally, it was just dead silent. And I think that screwed me up more than anything, because I was like expecting it, like, what are they going to say? They're going to say this, they're going to say that. And I was just like, they didn't piss me off so bad. I was so upset about that.
Well, that could be a job for Tony, honestly, if we got him into at some point. He's very much like, but he definitely.
Well, he made fun of my hair immediately.
Yeah, he didn't hesitate. I don't know this guy, but I'm going to attack.
That's great. That's great. It's too bad he's not here. I'd be making fun of him a little. It's probably good he's not here, actually.
Yeah. But no, super cool. Like I said, yeah, I hope someday in the future we can do this again. Like I said, I've got a million more questions. And like I said, hopefully if it can be some benefit to you and Carmen and your school down there. I do hope to go down there sometime. That would be awesome. I think that's something that the wife would, like I said, she's kind of, actually, I think she'd love it once she went to like the tracker school, but it's kind of that getting out there at first.
If
When I
she
said,
likes the Caribbean, she could just hang out while we do the fun stuff. And then she might see how fun the fun stuff is.
I think so. I think the Caribbean is an extra bonus. Although, like I said, the minute, I honestly think she would be, she has this thing where I have whatever interest, whatever things I'm doing, I kind of get in it, but I'm kind of cautious. I'm hold back, but she is, the minute she gets in, then she's 100%, like, because I could see her like running with it and like, okay, I'm going to be a caretaker here, and whatever, like once she did it, I'm like, no, take some baby steps first, but like after her first day, she'd just be all over it. So,
well, maybe one day we'll come to you. We have a couple of friends who are in the Midwest area, and a close friend from here who lives in Chicago now. And we had talked about, we always are talking to people about potentially traveling to them to teach, which is another thing that we do for anybody who's listening and interested in learning this stuff. We definitely have traveled before for classes, and we'll do that again. So yeah, I know there's people who want to be able to learn, but don't necessarily want to be, or don't have the ability to travel. So that is something that we've done in the past, and something we would definitely do in the future as well.
oh, good. I'm glad you got to mention. That's a great idea. Well, say hello to Carmen for me.
Yeah, sorry she couldn't show up, but she's working while I get to just blab here, which she says I'm good at. So that's good.
But no, a really great conversation. Again, thank you for making the time, and hopefully, like I said, this will draw some attention to your school. But it was a great conversation, and I'm always happy to have tracker people on here, kind of crossing the worlds between that and my martial arts background, and with Tony's group. So I know there's a lot of people out there who are. It's funny how many martial arts people are aware of and or interested in the tracker thing. There's definitely
well,
some
I mean,
crossover there.
I saw in the beginning what is some wrestling there. I used to wrestle in high school. I loved it. I love that. I love that not necessarily the competitive aspect of martial arts, but the mindset that I get into. It actually, just as I'm talking about it, made me think about, I remember when I started wrestling, it's like the first 3 or 4 matches or so. It was like, I didn't do anything. It was like I was too scared to do anything. And it's kind of the same with the hunting and the fishing. Like not the fishing so much as the hunting, but with the spear fishing, where it's more like hunting, it's like I didn't grow up with this stuff. Like nobody taught me how to hunt. Nobody in my family hunted that I knew. Nobody did any of these primitive skills things at all. Nobody taught me this until I learned it from somebody else. Then when it was time to kill the animal, it was really hard. And I just had to switch to a different space of my mind, to a different aspect of myself. And I felt like it was the same with wrestling. It was like I didn't do anything because I was afraid of what it meant to do it. And then all of a sudden it was however many matches in, I've had enough experience where I'm like, all I have to do is do this and that and that. And oh, okay, I pinned him. Okay, it's done. That was easy, actually. Once I used that different aspect of myself. And I love that about martial arts, that it's not, I don't think it's the competition part of it, but it's the challenge within the competition. It's the challenge of, oh, this person is doing this right now, and I have to counter it with this or with that. And I love that mind space that it puts you in, where you're not necessarily, it's kind of like reacting, but it's more like dancing, where you're reacting, but you're also trying to get the partner, your adversary, to move in a certain way so that you can move in a certain way. And I love that aspect about martial arts. So next time we talk, it'd be better if your partner is here, so he would bring it back to the martial arts. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, for sure. I mean, and again, yeah, it's a very primitive experience. It's one of the most primitive, right? The primitive struggle. And you have to be in the moment. You have to be in the moment, and you have to be maybe thinking one or two steps ahead. So there's a lot of things that emotionally, I mean, so much of any sports, but especially something like a combat sport or martial art is mental.
Yeah, it's the original. If we're talking about primitive skills, ancient skills, it's the most ancient form of sport. I mean, people have wrestled and fought for sport for, I mean, hundreds of thousands of years. People have done that. So that's a primitive skill as well.
Yeah, and animals tussle. I mean, you see little animals playing and rolling around. I mean,
yeah,
that's fighting. I mean,
yeah, totally. And that's exactly what it is. People think, oh, they're playing. Well, they're actually learning to kill right now. So that's like, I love that. I love that. I feel like it's another core skill that martial arts is really connected to our primitive past.
It is. It's a human body skill. I mean, it's just another part of being comfortable with your body and being comfortable with other people. It's part of our legacy as animals on this planet. And, it's just struggle's a part of it. And
any human being could watch somebody hunting and know what was going on, even if you didn't have experience with it. Any human being across cultures could see two people fighting and know exactly what's going on. Even if it wasn't a real fight, let's say a wrestling match, for instance, where they're not trying to punch or kick or anything like that. Still two people, you know what that is. No matter what culture, you immediately know what it is. And what are those mirror neurons they say, what the scientists say, where it's like you see that happening and you immediately envision yourself like, how would I deal with that? Oh, I would think I would grab his leg and pull it this way, or I think I would try to do a wrist lock there and push him to the side, whatever it is. It's like we connect to that very easily.
Very true. Yeah, we have to get you talking with Tony. I think that would be a great,
It'll be fun.
Conversation. Yeah,
I could make fun of him for being from Cleveland. It'd be great.
Yeah, I was waiting. Yeah, I think that's definitely a issue for him. He knows the reputation, and so he's very much a Cleveland apologist. And I've been there with him. It's a great town, but yeah, the mistake by the lake, as they call it.
Exactly. Oh, thank you. You said it before I did.
All right. Well, have a great rest of the day. Thank you again for making all this time. It was an awesome conversation. And I hope to see you at Tracker School again. If not, I hope to be down by your place at some point, because that sounds awesome.
Yeah. And, for anybody listening who's interested in learning this stuff, there's so many schools all over the place. It doesn't have to be coming with us at all. I appreciate that you give us the outlet. Again, our website is Caribbean Earth Skills. Or if you just want a vacation and want to be able to blab to us while you're on vacation here, it's Mount Victory Camp is our other website. So that's the Mount Victory Camp is is our rental property, and Caribbean Earth Skills is our is the school that we run. But yeah, if anybody's interested, like jump into that interest, because it's a lifelong thing. I'll never master it. I'll always be an apprentice to this. And so just might as well get started now.
All right. Well, great talking to you. Yeah, and like I said, have a great rest of your day. And yeah, this is signing off for now.
All right. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.